Welcome to our podcast. Today is Thursday, October 8th, and this is episode 11. Meredith here with
Brian, co-founders of Vote on Purpose.
Yes, and we have one of our judges on the ballot with us today. We've got Judge Brook with us via Zoom. He was nice enough to do this Zoom meeting for us.
Yeah, we appreciate you. Thanks for joining us, Judge Brook.
Well, thank you all so much for the opportunity, Meredith and Brian. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate what y'all are doing, just making sure that folks have the opportunity to learn a little bit more about what's going to be on the ballot this fall. So thank y'all.
Absolutely. Thanks. You. So just looking at your background, tell us a little bit about your current role, what you're doing now, and why you want to remain on the Court of Appeals.
Sure. So I'm currently a judge on the North Carolina Court of Appeals. Governor Cooper appointed me to the bench in April of 2019. There were 2 vacancies on the bench at that point, and he appointed me to one of those vacancies and Judge Reuben Young to another one of those vacancies. So we came onto the court at the same time. I'm one of 15 judges on the North Carolina Court of Appeals. We are a little bit different than the North Carolina Supreme Court. The North Carolina Supreme Court has 7 justices, and they sit all together when they hear cases. Our court is, we sit by randomly assigned 3 judge panels. So we do have a function where we can sit all 15 of us together, but we've actually never done that.
Oh, wow.
Now that might change at some point if it remains the law, but usually it's a randomly assigned 3-judge panel that we sit on, and I've been serving on the court for about 17 months now.
Awesome.
All right. So I guess your background, you were a staff attorney for the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, as well as a legal director for the ACLU.
That's right.
Yeah. How does that kind of prepare you or get you ready to be a judge in that situation?
It's a wonderful question. So what I did at SCSJ and the American Civil Liberties Union in North Carolina, I think was really, really good preparation. Prior to being a staff attorney at SCSJ, I worked at a law firm in Raleigh. That was good preparation as well. But in particular, when I was at SCSJ and ACLU of North Carolina, and when I was at a law firm, I worked on really every sort of subject matter that you could possibly work on. Everything from employment law to property law to voting rights to constitutional rights. I worked in all of those spaces when I was a firm attorney and when I was a public interest attorney. But then in addition to that, especially when I was at SCSJ and the ACLU of North Carolina, I worked throughout our state and federal court system. I worked at trial courts in the state and federal court system, but I also worked when cases went up on appeal, either in the state court system or the federal court system, including successfully leading litigation at the United States Supreme Court, which is a rare opportunity to get to be able to do that. And that's actually litigation that came out of Winston-Salem that was heard by then sitting Judge Beatty, who was in Winston-Salem. So that was really wonderful preparation as well, because I got to not only work at the trial court level and see how trials operate, but I got to get appellate experience and really get experience working with judges who are doing on what I'm doing now on the bench, and also learning the ropes about how appellate procedure operates, because that sort of stuff is exceptionally important in our day in, day out. But, the final point that I would make about all of the work that I did, and this includes my volunteer work. I helped found the housing law clinic at El Centro Hispano in Durham, advising folks about housing problems. I answered phones at the Compass Center for women and families in Chapel Hill, dealing with families that are in crisis or domestic violence situations. But also I taught as an adjunct professor at UNC School of Law in their legal research and reasoning program. But all of that work and my work at FCSJ, ACLU in North Carolina, I worked with North Carolinians from every imaginable background. I worked with companies. I worked with working class folks who would call me at 10 o'clock at night or Saturday morning, because that's when they weren't working. And that was when they had the opportunity to talk to me about their case. I met with folks in their living rooms. I met with folks in public meeting spaces at public libraries, because those were the places where you could meet. And I really do think that working with North Carolinians from every walk of life really underlined for me that you always have to keep in mind the human stakes of the cases that are in front of us.
Right. So even with that, we learned a little bit for judges on the Court of Appeals. A lot of the work, obviously, you take it home and you're working at home and reviewing cases. Is that kind of the protocol and a normal day?
Sure. Yeah. No, I have a big pile of briefs that are very terrifying looking, especially if you look at them as a pile as opposed to taking them one at a time. But yeah, no, we go through, we start with written submissions by the parties. They file a record that sort of includes what happened at the trial court level. They include written briefs where they argue and say, listen, this is why the trial court got it wrong, or why we should have won, or why the other side should not have won. We sort of try to make sure that we master the facts and the record right at the start. And, oftentimes, I get to work with three wonderful young attorneys who are clerks in my chambers. We're kicking those cases around before we talk to anybody else, any of the other two judges on our panel, to make sure that we, understand things similarly, or at the very least that we understand what the key questions that we need to ask are going forward. And then, once we've mastered the case, we go to conference with the two other randomly assigned judges who are on our panel with us. And most of our cases, we just decide on the written briefs. We don't actually decide them based on oral argument, but we do have oral argument on occasion. And I've had 3 remote oral arguments during the pandemic, because we're not having oral arguments in person right now, which I think is wise given everything that's going on. But, the oral arguments are an opportunity, and conference is an opportunity to sort of ask questions of the parties that are in front of us, or ask questions of the other judges about how they're seeing things. And so I come away from that conference with, or the oral argument with a fuller understanding of really the key issues in the case. And then I come back to chambers and oftentimes talk with the clerks again and say, here's what I've heard. We have to, we hear generally every 2 weeks between 9 and 12 cases, and I have to write 3 or 4 of those cases. And so I work with the clerks on, figuring out how we're going to set up the opinion, obviously how we're going to decide the case, but how we would sort of organize the opinion, how we sort of will reason our way to what we believe is the correct result under the facts and the law. We're pretty much remote right now, just because my clerks feel more comfortable at this moment working remotely. I go into the courthouse every now and again, but I can do the vast majority of my work from my home office, and I frequently do that. One of the things that I miss is, we get together and we work really hard on these opinions and send, I don't know that we've ever had an opinion go out with fewer than 2 or 3 drafts being exchanged back and forth inside of our office. We circulated one on Tuesday of this week that we probably did 20 drafts of the opinion because it's just very, very complicated, and it was sort of like an onion, and every time you pulled one layer, you found other layers that you needed to address as well. And one of the things that I missed being in chambers with the clerks is, a lot of times, especially right at the end of drafting an opinion, we will sit there and stare at 2 or 3 sentences that aren't working the way that we want them to work, that they're not as clear as they could be, or they're not conveying exactly what we want them to convey. And we'll just sit there, the 4 of us, and sort of stare and point at the sentence and sort of kick them around together. And that's No, that's just, if you're a lawyer and you're sort of a law nerd, and I'm definitely a law nerd, that's it's just it's a very exciting thing to do. But also, part of why I love the job is because I'm a North Carolinian. I'm a double Tar Heel, a public school kid. My mom was a public school teacher. I've gotten so much from the state. So being able to play some role in giving back via the work that I'm able to do on the Court of Appeals is really gratifying.
That's awesome. I'm from a teacher family too, so I understand. My mom was a high school teacher, and her twin sister was too.
My mom was a high school, when we first moved up here, I'm from Macon, Georgia originally, which I always tell people is the home of Otis Redding and Little Richard and the Allman Brothers. So for a small town in Georgia, it's got a lot of music.
Yeah.
But we moved up here when I was 11, and Mom's first job was at Clayton High School in Johnston County. But she predominantly taught in middle school and predominantly taught 7th grade. And let me tell you something, if anybody can teach 7th grade, they are a stronger person than I am, because I was a jerk in 7th grade.
I think we probably all were.
I think a lot of us were.
Yeah.
All right. So you want to take the break?
Oh yeah, let's take a little break.
Take a
And
break. That was good information.
all right, we are back with Judge Chris Brook, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the actual role of a judge on the North Carolina Court of Appeals.
Yeah, and I mean, in the simplest way, my role on the Court of Appeals is to vote on the cases that come in front of me, and to write pretty much every third opinion when I'm on a 3-judge panel. So in the course of the year and a half that approximately year and a half that I've been on the court, I've voted in over 240 cases.
Wow.
And I have written more than 80 opinions in that period of time. So you can tell right off the bat that they ain't letting me twiddle my thumbs over there. But more broadly about what our role is, I think that folks have an idea, or a lot of folks have an idea of what trial courts do, because if you have a speeding ticket, or you run a red light, or, somebody got into a fist fight, you might have gone to a trial court at some point.
That's the typical interaction of courts with most people.
Yeah.
And that's what we see on TV and in movies, and of course that's real life. So that's what we
are
think
familiar
about.
with. Yeah.
Everybody has sort of a Law and Order idea, Law and Order TV show idea of what trial courts are. And listen, criminal courts are a huge a part of our court system, obviously. But trial courts also handle things, like family law disputes and the child abuse, neglect, dependency cases. So I think people have an idea, what happens at the trial court level, and I think to a certain extent people have an idea what the North Carolina Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court do. They're sort of the end of the road for litigation, state and federal courts. Court of Appeals, might be a little bit squishier because we're between those two spots. So the first difference between us, the difference between us and a trial court is that we're not hearing from witnesses. We're not taking facts. We're reviewing transcripts for a trial that's already taken place, right? So we have a much more limited role. We're really just reviewing what happened at the trial court level to see if there was a mistake that occurred at the trial court level. We're not typically reweighing the evidence to see if we think the trial court was right necessarily, but we're trying to figure out if they made a mistake that requires us to reverse them. So that's the difference between us and the trial court. The difference between us and the Supreme Court is you have an appeal as of right, as a general matter, to the North Carolina Court of Appeals. And what that means is that if you don't like what happened at the trial court, typically you can be heard by the North Carolina Court of Appeals. There's some things that go straight to the Supreme Court. Now, termination of parental rights cases go straight to the Supreme Court. Death penalty cases have historically always gone directly to the Supreme Court. But pretty much everything else goes or typically goes through us. And typically most things end in the appellate court system at the North Carolina Court of Appeals. We're the final word in more than 80, perhaps even more than 90% of cases, because the Supreme Court, unlike us, gets to decide what cases they want to hear. They can decide to hear cases when there's a unanimous 3-0 opinion at our court. They have to hear a case when there's a dissent at our court if there is an appeal. But they end up hearing a lot fewer cases than we do. And then, the other difference between us and the Supreme Court is we're really an error correction court. We're looking to see if the trial court made a mistake. We're not looking at facts, but we're looking largely at whether there was legal error.
Right.
And the North Carolina Supreme Court lays out precedent and says, here are the rules of the road. And if there's precedent directly on point, we have to apply the precedent of the North Carolina Supreme Court. It doesn't mean that I get to ignore precedent if I disagree with it. There's certainly been cases that have come to me where I've been like, I don't know that this makes a lot of sense, but my role is to apply that precedent. The North Carolina Supreme Court doesn't reconsider their precedent frequently, and for good reason, because obviously stare decisis and sort of having a legal status quo that tells you what the rules of the road are, that's important. The rule of law is important. People predictability is important. Knowing how to organize your business, knowing what is and is not illegal. That's important stuff, right? But the Supreme Court can review their precedent. We typically at the Court of Appeals don't get to review precedent. So it's a little bit of a different role that we have.
Gotcha. You wanted to talk about, I know you addressed that too as well, like how does one get appointed by the governor as opposed to
being elected?
You just, saw you and was like, that's a good guy right there.
Or you bake the best apple pies or something,
How does that work?
Man, if it were an apple pie baking contest, I would be unemployed. So, the interesting thing is, when I was at SCSJ and when I was at ACLU of North Carolina, we were oftentimes suing the state of North Carolina. We sued the state over voter restrictions that were put in place, the voter ID requirements, cuts to early voting, the elimination of same-day registration, the elimination of out-of-precinct balloting. We sued the state over that. And, the Attorney General, as a typical matter, has to defend the state. So I had something of a relationship with Attorney General Roy Cooper, and in particular, more of a relationship with his staff. And, listen, we were on the other side of lawsuits frequently. But, I pride myself on my professionalism, and also, I pride myself on trying to solve problems for the clients that I represented when I was in practice. So if there's a way that I can be civil and work constructively, even with a party opponent when I was in practice, I wanted to do that. So, we had a constructive and respectful relationship with Attorney General Roy Cooper's office when I was in private practice. When he moved over to the governor's office, some of these issues continued to percolate, and he would continue to be involved in some of this litigation. So we had that relationship. I knew that there were going to be vacancies that were going to open up on the Court of Appeals. At least one, we have a mandatory retirement age of 72. And I knew that one of the judges, actually the judge that I did replace, was reaching the age of 72. And I knew that was coming up. And I reached out and indicated that I would be interested in being considered for the appointment. And, I submitted a lot of material to them as they vetted me. And I was interviewed by the governor for about an hour. And I can tell you, not the exact date when that occurred, but it was in March of 2019, I think. It was the day UNC lost to Auburn in the NCAA tournament, because I'm a huge Tar Heels fan. And at the end of the conversation, he told me that Cam might have the flu and might be a little bit sick. And I think Little also had the flu in that game. So that was the end of the conversation. And sure enough, like 2 hours later, Auburn kicked our butt, made every 3-pointer on earth. So I remember that day for a lot of reasons.
Nice. So you want to ask him?
So kind of with your background with the ACLU, there's a lot of things that happened here in Winston recently that the ACLU was involved with the Black Lives Matter movement. That's kind of how we started this whole project. So as far as what's happening with the current right and everything going on, You know,
As a judge, how do you have to navigate those waters? Do you form opinions? Do you have to throw that out of your head or consider what's happening when you?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I have to be thoughtful about how to answer these questions, because obviously I'm a human being, and I didn't quit being a human being that reads newspapers and has a visceral reaction to things like the killing of George Floyd and myriad other issues that we've been facing as a nation. I have to be thoughtful to make sure that everybody who appears in front of me knows that they're going to get a fair shake, that they're going to get a fair hearing, that I haven't prejudged any issue. But obviously, the Black Lives Matter movement has played an unbelievably important role in spurring a conversation about race, about structural racism, about implicit bias, and in a lot of ways deserves credit for pushing us to have a racial reckoning that we have needed to have for a long period of time, and that we've kicked the can on.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I am most proud of about being a member of the judiciary in North Carolina is that in an attenuated way, that Chief Justice Sherry Beasley is my boss. She's the first ever Black woman to be the Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court in 200 years of existence on the of the North Carolina Supreme Court existing. Justice Pat Timmons Goodson was the first ever Black woman on the North Carolina Supreme Court, but I believe that Chief Justice Beasley is the second ever Black woman on the Supreme Court. So she's been a trailblazer throughout the course of her career. And we're so fortunate to have her leadership at this moment in time, because she has experienced this in a very real way. And she, after the killing of George Floyd, talked about her twin sons and the talk that she had with her two young Black sons about how to navigate challenging circumstances. That is not a conversation that either of my parents ever had to have with me.
Yeah, I just had that conversation as well with a Zoom meeting with our union, and I had to bring that up. Like, it's something that other people, white people, don't even have to even consider. What's going to happen when you walk outside? What happens when you cross the street and you have a hat on backwards or your hoodie on and you walk into a store? Or all those little things, we have to be fully aware of how someone else feels or perceives us. So it's at that early age, we already have to have some kind of like perception of other people. So it's a crazy thing to have to navigate and understand at a young age, and that kind of forms your thoughts and your actions from there.
And it's funny because even he picks on me still today. We've known each other for 9 years. And when we're out doing things, he'll say, "Oh, you didn't see that?" And I'm like, "No." He's so used to paying attention to everything, every surrounding. And I've never had to deal with that at all, ever.
Yeah, and not and I don't intend this example to be glib, but it is something that I thought about a lot when it happened, and it's a sort of small illustration of the white privilege that I have as a white man. When the gentleman got in trouble, or where the police were called at the Starbucks, I believe in Philadelphia, where they were having a meeting. I mean, I can't tell you how many times in my life I've been into a Starbucks and intended to get a cup of coffee, but instead just went to the bathroom and walked right back out because I didn't have time to get a cup of coffee, but I did need to use the restroom. And you know how many times somebody has said something about that to me? Zero.
Yep.
Never. Not a once. And if I set up shop and had a meeting like those gentlemen were having, nobody would have ever said anything to me, or it's very unlikely that it would have happened. Right. So, but to return to the Chief Justice Beasley point for a second, I think it's just very, very, to me, the starting point to make progress on these issues, whether it's in our judiciary, whether it's societally more broadly, is to have the right mindset. And when I say have the right mindset, I mean being honest, being forthright, and not being defensive about where we're at. And, you know, being defensive and acting like there is not a problem, or acting like the judiciary has functioned the same way for different people, historically or at the present time, really is an obstacle to making the change that we need to make. And I just exceptionally valued not only is she the right leader at the right time for our judiciary, but she really seized the moment to say, listen, we historically and currently have been part of the problem, and I want to play a role in making progress. You know, so it was both an honest conversation where she owned the challenges, but to me it was also a positive conversation, because it was like, how do we go forward?
Right.
How do we take the step forward to make our judiciary something that people have more confidence in?
Man, that's great leadership too. That's what you need.
And that's kind of a perfect little segue. We wanted to talk a little bit about diversity on the bench. So we'll take a little break and we'll come back and hit that topic.
Yep.
Okay. So we're kind of touching on the point of, you know, the importance of leadership and how, you know, understanding some diversity in Black Lives Matter movement. How important is it to have diversity on the bench, or do you feel like there's a need or room for that?
Not just race, but
Gender,
LGBTQ,
right?
And, you know, across kind of diversity as a whole right now.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's essential that we have a judiciary that reflects the diversity of North Carolina. I think the diversity of North Carolina is one of North Carolina's strengths. Right now, the Supreme Court is the most diverse. Our state Supreme Court is the most diverse Supreme Court, state Supreme Court in the United States.
Wow.
There are 3 women on the Supreme Court, and there's 3 Black members out of 7 of the Supreme Court. And, you know, they've recently had some rulings related to, for example, the Racial Justice Act, which had to do with the consideration of race in death penalty cases, a number of Batson cases, which have to do with the consideration of race in jury selection. Listen, I think having a Supreme Court that reflects North Carolina's demographics makes for more credible decision-making when it comes to issues that turn on race like that. The North Carolina Court of Appeals is not as diverse as the North Carolina Supreme Court. I know y'all have talked to Judge Laura Cubbage, who's from the Triad, who's also running for the Court of Appeals. Judge Cubbage is a great judge, a good friend of mine. We're texting right before I joined y'all today. Judge Cubbage, so right now the Court of Appeals is 15 judges, 2 people of color, 2 Black judges. Before Judge Young was appointed with me by Governor Cooper, there was 1 Black judge out of 15. If, you know, worst case scenario after November, we will go back to having 1 Black judge on the North Carolina Court of Appeals. Best case scenario, we will have 2 out of 15. So there's work to be done there. You know, more than half of our docket is criminal justice work. And listen, the reality is, and sort of the trying reality, because we know that if you look at data empirically, we know that people across races, you know, sort of break the law at a similar rate, right? But a lot of the folks who come in front of us are Black men in criminal cases. That is an empirical reality. So, you know, there are some real challenges when you're talking about interactions between Black young men and law enforcement. That you know, I think we all prosper from having representation from communities of color on our court. I know I talked to Judge Young and I talked to Judge Bryant about those issues frequently.
Yeah.
You know, I was also struck, I think we now have a female chief judge on the North Carolina Court of Appeals. We have a portrait of all of the people who've been judges on the Court of Appeals, and I walked up in the stairwell of our court, and I walked up the stairwell with my niece shortly after starting, and my niece is a firecracker. She's 5. And I was, you know, it goes from left, which is the oldest photos, to right, the newest photos. And there was one woman on the court, and I think the second woman ever appointed to the court was in like 86, which is not that long ago. And since then, I think we have 6 or 7 women on the court now. So close to half. We have historically on occasions had more than half of our court. And so my niece, looking at these photos, said, well, it wasn't so good over there, pointing to the left, but it's gotten better. Because she appreciates at a very young age the importance of you know, women being able to advance in the law. But
Right.
also, you know, when you're talking about, you know, employment discrimination, things like that, you know, women have a different perspective on that than men. And we should be open
Right.
and be availing ourselves of that sort of experience and expertise. Judge John Arrowwood is now a member of our court. He was elected to a full 8-year term in 2018. He's the first openly gay member of our court. I can tell you from swearing in judges who identify, swearing in young attorneys who identify as members of the LGBTQ community, how important Judge Arrowwood being on the bench is to folks who identify as LGBTQ.
Right.
So progress has been made, but work remains to be done. I think that's the bottom line.
Yeah, it's good to see that progress is being made. It's good to see that representation, definitely.
Well, and I should say one other thing. My final pitch is, you know, we need to have representation across lines of race, sex, sexual orientation. You also need experiential diversity. You know, you know, I think we have some former prosecutors on our court. I think that's a good thing. We don't have any former public defenders on our court. I don't think that's a good thing. You know, we have some former plaintiff lawyers in the civil context, some former defense lawyers in the civil context. I think that's a good thing. If memory serves, am the only member of our court at present who has a civil rights background. You know, I don't know that we should have 15 judges that have a civil rights background, because that's a very particular background. But I do think that my civil rights background is a real value add for our court, you know, because again, I've worked with people across all walks of life. I've done constitutional litigation before, which is something that, you know, not tons of people have experience with. So I really do think diversity in all ways makes for a better functioning judicial system.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the organization. Yeah, you're exactly right.
Exactly. Yeah. Y'all were mentioning that y'all work, well, I don't know if I'm allowed to mention where y'all work.
Yeah.
Y'all were mentioning y'all work for American Air. Like, heaven knows that y'all benefit from the fact that people have different perspectives on things. Sure. And you're going to have a better feeling for, you know, your customers' travel experiences based on that. And if it were just 72-year-old white guys, you know, you're not necessarily going to know what people want out of a travel experience or what challenges that they have. And I think that that's applicable in other contexts too.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's definitely different depending on who we deal with. Yeah, on a minute by minute basis. It can change person to person.
Yep.
So we like to ask about any ethical dilemma that you may have faced, whether it be something work related or personal, and how you overcame that.
Well, you know, the ethical dilemma that I think of relates to how we elect judges in North Carolina. You know, I don't know that there's a perfect system for selecting or electing judges. You know, there've been, you know, the federal bench is selected, so you have lifetime tenure. And, you know, you don't have to think very hard to think of some very challenging circumstances coming out of the federal judiciary based on Supreme Court confirmation hearings recently and further back in the past. But also you have, you know, lifetime tenure, I think, is helpful from the standpoint that it allows people maybe to set aside political considerations, which is what we should be doing, and just following the law and the facts where they lead. But, you know, there have also been, you know, in the federal judiciary, some scandals about essentially setting up chambers and workplaces that are not equitable, and where clerks are abused, either overworked or sexually harassed. And, you know, folks can be insulated by lifetime tenure from scrutiny. So there are challenges there. You know, electing judges is fraught as well, though, because again, like we talked about, people don't know tons about judges, you know?
Right.
And, you know, so, and I don't want to be sort of a politician like a member of the executive branch or the legislature, right? Because I don't see my job through that lens. You know, I've been a registered Democrat since I was 18 years old in North Carolina, but I don't like put on a blue robe and try to be a good Democratic judge. I try to leave politics out of it and be fair to everybody. I'd be mortified if Republicans or conservatives felt like they couldn't get a fair shake from me. Everybody should be able to get a fair shake from judges when they're heard. I will, you know, so I'm sort of agnostic about selecting versus electing. I will say that I don't think we do a great job, and it's obvious the legislature has set it up and the legislature can do what they want to do. I don't think the way we elect judges in North Carolina is super healthy for two reasons. First, we run as partisans, and, you know, I don't think of my job as being a Democratic judge. And I think, you know, a lot of people are going to vote for me because I'm a Democrat, and a lot of people are going to vote against me because I'm not a Republican. And that doesn't really have much to do with whether I'm doing a good job or not. But the other thing, we used to have public financing for judicial candidates, where you got a certain pot of money to run. You had to raise a certain amount of money on your own to show that you were a serious, viable candidate. But once you did that, you got a public financing, and every judge, you know, from Democrats to Republicans, folks who were registered independents, participated in that system. And the real benefit of that is, you know, you don't have to fundraise as much in a public financing system, because here's the ethical dilemma. My joke is that there are like 3 buckets of people that I can raise money from. One is my family. So it means calling my mom up and asking her for money, which is complicated. 2 is friends. So it's like folks I went to law school with or undergrad. So you're calling folks up that you haven't spoken to in 10 or 15 years and learning that they got divorced, which has definitely happened to me during the course of this, and makes for some, you know, oh, I'm very sorry conversations. But then the third bucket is folks who know why the North Carolina Court of Appeals is important. And that heavily skews to attorneys that appear in front of us. So you're raising money from folks who might have previously appeared in front of you, or you're raising folks from money from folks who might in the future appear in front of you. And, you know, trying to explain why that's not rotten to the public is complicated because it seems rotten, right? So the way that I resolve that ethical dilemma is just, I do my, you know, is work really hard to make sure if you know, you cannot give me, obviously you cannot give me money when you have a case in front of me, obviously. But also, I'm not going to, you know, in any way have any communication with anybody who has a case in front of me. And that's sort of the best that I can do to try to comply with the rules, but also foster confidence.
Right.
Yeah, that's got to be tough. That's a
slippery slope.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Wow. So where did you want to go? You kind of touched on the growing prison, I guess, well, the growing caseload of how it's unbalanced. I mean, as we kind of spoke on, Black men, or Black people make up like 13% of the population, but let 60 some odd percent of the prison population. So it seems like there's some kind of unbalanced or kind of weird, skewed situation of prison pipeline, if you will. Want to throw those terms out there. How do you have that in your mind when you see certain cases, or do you even just block out numbers and just stick with what you see on the paper and make sure they got a fair trial, basically?
Gosh, what an important question. And again, like, I have to be thoughtful about how I answer questions like this, because they're questions. Right now there's litigation, for instance, about release policies in jails and prisons related to COVID-19, right? Because obviously jails and prisons are dangerous places to be during the course of a pandemic where you have a very communicable virus, right? So I need to be thoughtful about that. But I can convey some, and I can convey some facts, and this is stuff that I'm relatively familiar with from my work at FDSJ and with ACLU. And Michelle Alexander is a former ACLU attorney who wrote The New Jim Crow, talked about and in a lot of ways spurred a lot of conversation that needs to be happening about mass incarceration. But the thing about the conversation about mass incarceration is it's really not a conversation that's limited to folks on the left of the political spectrum. Justice Gorsuch, who is obviously a Trump appointee to the Supreme Court, has talked throughout the time that he's been on the federal bench about the proliferation of laws and criminal sanctions that are out there, and it's talked about how we've sort of criminalized a huge swath of conduct that would not have historically been criminalized, and we're not talking about stuff where I think the vast majority, overwhelming majority would, there needs to be a law against murder. There needs to be a law against rape. We all agree on that stuff. But on, some lower level stuff, we have really, really swept everything in, is the point that Justice Gorsuch is making, to the criminal justice system. And that's not just for adults. That's for minors on occasions too, as you have school resource officers in schools. And my mom loved her school resource officers because they were school resource officers. Mm-hmm. But that's not how it works everywhere. And there's been a conversation around raise the age, where you could be tried as an adult when you're 16 in North Carolina. That's been changed up to 18. That was based on the former Chief Justice's recommendations in that direction. And I think that was obviously a step in the right direction. But there's also another ethic that's out there, which is this sort of realization that to a certain extent, we're all criminals, right? Like, I've jaywalked. That is a crime.
Right.
Right. I have speeded on occasion. Right. I have sped on occasions. When I've been on the interstate and elsewhere. That's a crime. But, and I've gotten a couple speeding tickets in my days. As I've gotten older, I've slowed down, as is oftentimes the case with folks. But there's a real conversation to be had there, because, despite the fact that I have broken, laws, and these were relatively minor laws, no consequences were visited upon me that were lasting, because there's some appreciation that especially young people make mistakes. And there's a line of Supreme Court cases about how we punish young people. It used to be legal to give minors the death penalty. Supreme Court said that was unconstitutional in 2005. I had a case in front of me last year when I was on the court where a 17-year-old, terrible crime, was convicted of first-degree murder, but was sentenced to life without the opportunity for parole.
Wow.
And the question was whether he should have at least been given the opportunity for parole.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court has spoken and said, like, listen, given a 17 or a 15-year-old life without the opportunity for parole is the same in name only compared to giving a 51-year-old that, you know, because you're sentencing somebody for 60, 70 years, which is just not the case with a 51-year-old. So, you know, a lot of this is in the policy realm. But, you know, I do think that there are important conversations that are going on out there. I'm heartened by the racial justice task force that the governor has put together, and they've made some recommendations. And they made some recommendations that really can help to ameliorate some of the folks who come into contact with the criminal justice system, but, you know, are pretty plainly not a threat to anybody. You know, one of the last things I did when I was a practicing attorney at ACLU was edit a court fines and fees report. And what we found is that people ended up on probation for years because they couldn't pay off their court fines and fees. What we found is that people ended up going back to jail on occasion because they couldn't pay their court fines and fees.
And they also can't vote.
And they can't vote during the course of that as well. And these were folks, you know, there's one guy in particular who we profiled in Edgecombe County. These are guys who had made mistakes in the past, but like were fulfilling all of the probation requirements, which if you know anything about probation, those are not small requirements. You have to fly the straight, you know, you have to be on the straight and narrow to be able to live with, to stick with all of the requirements. But the only reason he was on probation was because he couldn't pay court fines and fees. And that just is because he was a low wealth person. And so folks like that have, you know, paid their debt. And there needs to be a real conversation about whether they still need to be in contact with the criminal justice system. And, you know, one of the things that came out of the Racial Justice Task Force was a recommendation that there be an assessment of people's ability to pay court fines and fees before they're imposed. And because, you know, we do not, you know, it raises obviously very, very significant constitutional issues to be incarcerating somebody, jailing somebody because they're low wealth.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's definitely
tough.
Yeah. So we I don't know if we have any other questions or anything, topics you want to touch on, or
that's my major stuff.
Yeah. Well, look, we don't want to hold you. Know you're busy. You got to get to that giant tower of caseloads you're working on. So we appreciate your time, Judge Brook. You feel like we know you a little better. Feel like you're a good guy. We can reach out to you and gain some more insight. So it's a good thing. Thank you for being open and having a dialogue with us. We appreciate you.
Oh yeah. Thank you all, Meredith and Brian, for just the opportunity. Like I said, we don't get a lot of opportunities to really talk about the work that we do, but also talk about what we bring to the work. So I'm just really appreciative for the opportunity, but also, you know, like I hope folks listening and y'all get a feel for the fact that, you know, I love my job, and very much related to that, I work very, very hard at my job on a day in, day out basis and try very hard to get it right in every instance. And, you know, I think that's what you should want in a judge, is somebody who just sort of brings their lunch pail day in, day out and says, like, this is an important responsibility, and I gotta take it seriously every day, and I gotta take it seriously with every party that's in front of me.
Definitely. You got website, Instagram, anything, social media?
Oh boy. I'm at keepjudgechrisbrook.com. If you'd like to visit me online, that's my website. And you can follow me on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Judge Chris Brook, BROOK on Twitter and Facebook. So yeah, please follow me.
Yeah, we will add all those links in.
It'll be on this site.
And thank you so much. It was really nice talking with you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it's good talking to y'all.
Bye. See you.
Thank you. You have
very nice to meet you.